On Sunday, March the 16th of 2014, it was a chilly morning here in Fort Worth, and on that day, I was wrapping up a sermon series here at Seven City called Winning the War Within. What I did not know was that my own battle was about to begin that day. After our morning services, I remember walking outside. Again, it was a chilly morning, and as I walked outside, breathed in the cold air, I suddenly felt this kind of burning sensation in my lungs. I didn't think a whole lot about it, kind of went throughout my day and went to lunch. We were actually on that day having a lunch gathering and with several new people at Seven City. And after lunch, walked back outside again, breathed in, felt that burning sensation, thought, man, that's kind of weird, but it wasn't alarming. I went home and I began to feel worse and worse and worse as the day went on. And Karen eventually asked, she said, do I need to take you to the ER? And I said, no, I think I'm fine. I think I'm just coming, I feel like I'm coming down with the flu. I took a shower and I went to bed. The next morning I woke up at about 6 in the morning and I felt horrible. And I turned to Karen and I said, I think you need to take me to the ER. She takes me to emergency room that's kind of not too far from our house. So it's not a full-blown hospital, but it's more than just a small clinic that you'd visit. And she takes me to that ER, and I walk inside. Immediately, they begin to check me out. And before long, they've got an IV going. They're checking my oxygen level. They're giving me antibiotics. And as they are checking me out, they begin to ask me a battery of questions. And as they do so, they make this statement. They said, we think you have pneumonia, but we're not really sure. All we know is there is something serious going on in your body, and we can't treat you here. And after they said that, they said, we need to transport you either to Harris Southwest or Harris Downtown. Where would you like to go? And I said, let's go to Harris Downtown, because immediately I'm thinking, well, that's the bigger hospital. They got probably more resources. Let's just go there. Karen said, no, let's go to Harris Southwest. Well, turns out neither had room for us, so we just sat there and waited for a little while, and eventually an ambulance comes and transports me, and they say, where do you want to go? And we decided, well, let's go to Harris Southwest, which we now realize was actually a God thing. We get there, they pull me into a room, and they begin checking me out. And again, as they're checking me out, they asked, now, when did this start? I said, it started yesterday. This was on Monday when I'm having this conversation. I said, it started yesterday on Sunday. They said, well, we feel like you might have pneumonia, but your symptoms haven't been around long enough for it to be pneumonia. Are you sure it started yesterday? I said, I promise. I said, I felt fine yesterday morning. I said, it started yesterday. And they began checking me out. And as they're checking me out, they said, it sounds like you have an irregular heartbeat. I said, I have mitral valve prolapse, which is a fairly common condition where the mitral valve doesn't open and close properly. And I said, I've had it for years. I said, and every year I get a checkup from my cardiologist. They do an echocardiogram, and every year they say, it looks good, we'll see you next year. And I said, in fact, I had my last checkup 9 days ago in this hospital at my doctor's office. I said, his office is in this hospital. Told him the doctor's name, and they said, well, we're gonna call him up and maybe have him come check you out. So they call up my cardiologist. A little bit later, he walks into my room. Before he gets there, they did another echocardiogram just to check things out, to see how things were going. When my cardiologist comes in the room, he listens to my heart, and immediately I can tell something's up, but he doesn't say anything. And he said, I'm going to order an echocardiogram. I said, they've already done one. He said, I'm going to go read the results. He goes and reads the results. He comes back in my room and he says, Stephen, you don't have pneumonia. The cord to your mitral valve has snapped. This is serious. You need heart surgery. I'm calling Care Flight to transport you to the heart center downtown. And all of a sudden, it's like, oh, this is serious. And I said, well, when will the heart surgery be? And he said, well, it'll probably be like Thursday. We've got to, there was some fluid beginning to form on my lungs, which was the burning sensation I felt whenever I breathed in on Sunday. And so he says, we got to get you, we got to get things going. It's probably going to be Thursday before you're actually prepped, ready to be able to actually have surgery. This is Monday when he was telling me this. I said, okay. A little while later, the Care Flight team walks in. They start doing everything they do to prepare me. And while they're preparing me, one of the nurses says, we're probably gonna need to intubate you for whenever you're on the helicopter. Just make sure you're calm and everything. We'll sedate you, intubate you, and wake you back up when we get to the hospital. Are you okay with that? And I said, well, it beats dying, right? I didn't know what else to say, and I didn't know what all that entailed because it had never been done to me before, right? And so they start preparing me, and I tell Karen and Ashley, I love you, and they sedate me, and they intubate me, and they load me on the helicopter for the most expensive 6-minute ride I've ever taken in my life. We land. They bring me in my room. They don't wake me back up. And that Monday night, 3 doctors come to meet with Karen, and they said, Stephen's between a rock and a hard place. He is simultaneously experiencing heart failure and pulmonary failure. And he needs surgery, but his lungs are filled with fluid. And so as I began to talk with her, they said, well, what we're going to try to do is we're going to try to drain the fluid off of his lungs tonight. But fever has also set in, and so we're going to try to drain the fluid. But if he's okay, and if the fever's not like an issue, then maybe tomorrow we'll actually be able to do heart surgery. And so that, Karen would tell you, was the darkest night for her in this whole ordeal. That night they did just that. They drained what turned out to be 2 liters of fluid off my lungs. That put that in perspective. Like, that's a whole Diet Coke, at a birthday party. You know what I'm talking about? Like, that's like a 2-liter bottle. Drain it off my lungs. And at that time, my parents were out of town. They were visiting my sister in California. They got the news, and my older brother said, y'all need to come home now. And so they got a flight home that Tuesday morning. They get home. My mom walks into the room where I'm at, still intubated, sedated, all of that, and she prays, and right at that moment the doctors come and they wheel me off. They told Karen this is probably going to be a 4 to 8 hour surgery. We need to repair the other cords in his heart. They said the mitral valve is only 15% salvageable, so they were going to have to install a mechanical heart valve, and they were going to have to do some repairs on the heart itself. They said we're probably looking at 4 to 8 hours. And so they wheeled me into surgery, and 2 hours later they come to get Karen, which that's either really good news or really bad news. And so they come to get her and walk her what seemed like a mile down a corridor to a whole different area of the hospital without saying a word. So you're kind of left to wonder, is this bad news? And finally get to where they were going. The doctor comes out and said surgery was a success. And surprise, I'm here today, right? So surgery with, some of you are like, does he come through? Yeah, I do. I'm here. I am, okay? This is not a figment of your imagination for the last 12 years, okay? And comes out, says surgery was a success, but the next 48 hours were pretty critical. And so I remain intubated, sedated. Finally, late Wednesday night, they take me off of the being intubated and all of that stuff, and they wake me up, which that was fun, and they're yanking this tube out of your throat and everything, and wake me up. And I remember after they wake me up, and Karen is there, and she talks to me for a little bit, and then her and my family go out into the waiting, or not out into the waiting room, but right outside my room where I'm staying. And the door is open, and I can hear them out there talking to the doctor. And I can hear them talking about how Stephen's doing and what's happening and what the next couple of days look like and everything. And I'm sitting there realizing, okay, when they told me they were going to fly me here from the other hospital, they were supposed to wake me up, and they never did. And clearly, I've already had surgery now. And I can hear them outside talking, and all I can think about is, I don't want to hear anything they're saying right now. Because I don't know what they're saying, and I don't know what prognosis the doctor's given, and I don't know what's going down right now, and the last thing I want to do is spend the rest of the night thinking about whatever they say. So I start moaning, okay? I go, close the door! Close the door! And after I say that like 3 or 4 times, finally my sister-in-law pokes her head in the door. She goes, what? What's wrong? I said, close the door. You want me to close? Close the door. So, okay, so she closes the door because I don't want to hear anything. How many know when you're in a mess, you don't want to hear any more bad news? You know what I'm talking about? And they close the door. And that started an 8-day stay in the hospital, and eventually go home, spend 6 weeks at home, recovering. Every time I would cough, if you've ever had open heart surgery, you know this. Every time I would cough, it was like someone was driving nails through my chest, because you just just feels like you're about to come undone. And yet, over the next 6 weeks, God just faithfully was there. He was present and brought a full recovery. I've shared my story, if you've been at Seven City very long. In fact, some of you were there at that time and provided the most extraordinary love and kindness to Karen and I during that time. But there's a part of my story that I think I've only shared maybe once before. And that is that a couple of months prior to my heart surgery, which again was completely unexpected, because I'd have my checkup every year and everything was always fine, and my doctor would always say, I'll see you next year. And next year I'd come, they'd do the same routine, and it looks great, I'll see you next year. In fact, my cardiologist later told me, he said, in 18 years, I've only seen 3, maybe 4 heart valves actually rupture. He said, usually we catch it in time, we do the surgery, all's good. They said, you're we just don't, he said, I don't personally see that very often. And again, it was just 9 days after my annual heart surgery, boom, this thing ruptures completely unexpected. In fact, it probably happened while I was preaching on a Sunday morning at Seven City and never realized it. Because it was right after service when I would breathe in and I would feel that cold air in my lungs and realize what was beginning to happen. Well, a couple of months before all of this went down, over the Christmas break, I took some time to write and refresh some articles on my blog. I've got a blog, and there's various articles on there that I've written over the years. And during the 2013 Christmas break, I wrote some articles, I refreshed them. And as with any blogging platform, you can schedule the blog to post publicly on whatever day you want it to. You don't have to, you don't write it and then publish it that day. You can do that. But you can also schedule it days out, weeks out, months out. And so that's what I did. I had several articles that were prepared, and some that I'd written before that I kind of refreshed and revised. And I scheduled them out. And one of the articles that I wrote, or that I revised that day, was an article that I simply titled, "Being in the 1/3 Who Finish Well." Being in the 1/3 who finish well. And in this article, I share some research that has been done, and I'll reference that here in a moment. But I also talk about, like, how do you beat the odds whenever it comes to finishing well? Because it turns out the odds are actually stacked against us. So how do you beat the odds whenever it comes to finishing life well? So again, this was the Christmas break. I think it was early January when I actually scheduled this blog post, and I just randomly picked a day. And the day I picked was Tuesday, March 18th, which was the day of my heart surgery. So imagine how my family and my friends felt when on the morning of my heart surgery, they receive an email in their inbox that talks about finishing well. Strange. I mean, I wasn't even awake at that time. Strange, ironic, downright freaky, right? Pick your term. But thankfully, right, on that day, I didn't finish. But it was a stark reminder that one day we will all finish our race. One day we will all finish the race of life that God has called us to. And the question on that day will be, did we finish well? Did we leave a legacy for future generations that really counts, that really matters? And so this morning, as we begin this series, we're going to take a look at this idea of what does it take to finish well? That when that day does come, when that time does come, which my prayer is it's a long way away for all of us, right? But you know, the stats are pretty convincing. 1 out of 1 die, okay? So the day will come when the race ends, when we finish. But will we finish well? Will the legacy we write with our lives be one that we actually are happy for people to remember? What does that look like in our lives? During this series, we're going to explore that question, and to help us in this journey, we're going to take a look at a passage of Scripture that the Apostle Paul writes to his young apprentice, Timothy. In fact, he wrote 2 letters to Timothy. We're going to look at the first letter he writes. And in 1 Timothy chapter 4, verses 1 and 2, Paul says this to Timothy. He says, "Now the Holy Spirit tells us clearly that in the last times, some will turn away from the true faith. They will follow deceptive spirits and teachings from demons. These people are hypocrites and liars, and their consciences are dead." Notice what Paul says here. He says that there will be times when people don't finish well. They don't finish well because they will turn away from the true faith. So he begins by giving Timothy this warning and acknowledging that there are some people that claim to be followers of Christ. They're not going to finish the race well because they've turned away from their faith. And they have followed teachings that are not of God, and teachings that are even demonic in nature. And unfortunately, that's not that uncommon. In fact, Dr. Bobby Clinton conducted extensive research on the lives of leaders in the Bible. And he discovered that only 1/3 of leaders in the Bible finished well. The article that I had written on that day that I posted, and it was published on the day that my heart surgery took place, it was based on this research from Dr. Clinton that only 1/3 finish well. And why do people not finish well? Dr. Clinton discovered in his research that people do not finish well for a variety of reasons, some of which include the misuse or abuse of finances, the abuse of power, pride, sexual misconduct, unhealthy family relationships, wounding that they never found healing from, and a plateau in personal growth. They simply stopped growing and began coasting. So the question really isn't whether or not you're a leader. The question is, how do you then finish well and leave a God-honoring legacy for future generations, which I'm guessing all of us want to do. I'm guessing all of us want to be able to finish this race well and be able to pass something on besides material possessions to the future generation that actually they look and they say, that was a life well lived. And I want to do the same. So this morning, I want to share with you 4 essential keys that we find in the remainder of Paul's writing here to help us finish well and to leave a legacy. And to do this, I'm going to bless you with some of my artistic skill today. I've only done this maybe once before that I can remember, and So here we go, all right? You may want to get your cameras ready because you're about to be wowed, okay? All right, I know you're impressed. I'm going to stand over here so you can pull your cameras out. I don't see any cameras out. Okay. All right. If we want to finish well, if we want to leave a legacy that really matters, there's 3 things, and then there's something at the core of these three things that influence all of them. So here's the first one. We're going to put at the top here the word character. Character. In other words, who you are. Who you are. I want you to notice what Paul says after he has said that there are some who will not finish well because they turn away from their faith. He then goes into the rest of chapter 4, where you find these things emerge that he tells Timothy to do that really matter. These are the things that make the difference. And so the first one is character, and this is how he describes it in 1 Timothy 4, 7 through 10. He said, do not waste time arguing over godless ideas and old wives' tales. Instead, train yourself to be what? Godly. Physical training is good, but training for godliness is much better, promising benefits in this life and in the life to come. This is a trustworthy saying, and everyone should accept it. This is why we work hard and continue to struggle, for our hope is in the living God, who is the Savior of all people, and particularly of all believers. Notice, the very first part of legacy is about our character, who we are. Character is focused on both your integrity and your spirituality. It's both. Living a life of integrity, a life that is whole and complete and honoring to God, and living a life where there's spirituality clearly at work, where you can point to a deep, abiding relationship with Jesus. It's about how you live and your commitment to Christ. Because when it comes to your legacy, how many of you know there is nothing worse than doing things to contribute to the world, and yet your personal life is a total wreck? And the people who know it are the people who know you best. I love the definition of success that says success is when the people who know you best love and respect you the most. A lot of people, it's the other way around. The people who love and respect them the most are not the people who know them best. It's the people who see them from a distance. Everything looks good on the outside. Friend, it's the people who know you best. When they love and respect you, that tells you there is probably a deep, abiding character in the depths of your soul. There is a relationship with God that gives you a stability that is honoring to Him. So character is essential. In fact, Jesus said it like this in John 15, verse 5. He said, yes, I am the vine, you are the branches. Those who what? Remain in me, and I in them will do what? Produce much fruit. For apart from me, you can do nothing. Notice, when we abide in Christ, our lives produce fruit. What kind of fruit? The fruit of the Spirit. What is the fruit of the Spirit? It is character at its very core. It is the character of God Himself. Love and joy and peace and patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. When you abide in Jesus, it's His Spirit that produces that kind of character inside you. It is not willpower, it is His Spirit at work in you. So if you're going to leave a legacy, it starts with character. And then it goes to a second piece, and we're just going to call this connection. Now, I'm not talking about networking here, but it starts with the letter C, and all of these start with C, so I had to make it a C. You know what I'm talking about? So, connection, it's all about who you impact. Who you impact. It's the relational side of things. I want you to notice how Paul continues in his instruction to Timothy, verse 14 and 15. He then says this, teach these things and insist that everyone learn them. Don't let anyone think less of you because you are young. Be an example to all believers in what you say, in the way you live, in your love, your faith, your purity. Notice he's pointing back to character here. Until I get there, focus on reading the scriptures to the church, encouraging the believers and teaching them. Notice these two phrases, insist that everyone learn them, and encourage the believers, teaching them. What is Paul saying? He's saying, hey, Timothy, listen, you need to encourage and invest in people. Why? Because people are the only thing that live forever. And he's saying, encourage people, invest in them. That's part of your legacy. Yeah. Then he gives one last one. Contribution. Contribution. Notice what he says next, verse 14 and 15. He says, do not neglect the spiritual gift you received through the prophecy spoken over you when the elders of the church laid their hands on you. Give your complete attention to these matters. Throw yourself into your tasks so that everyone will see your progress. Notice what Paul's doing here. He says, hey, Tim, let me remind you, you do have a gift. And you're going to be responsible for that gift. Timothy, listen to me. I want you to take that gift that you received, and I want you to throw yourself into the task you've been called to. And by the way, there should be some progress with this. There ain't no coasting, Timothy. There should be progress in what you're doing. What is Paul doing? Paul is raising in Timothy's mind the realization, the understanding that, hey, Tim, you have been entrusted with God-given resources, and with that comes a responsibility to steward them wisely for the glory of God and the good of others. Timothy, you're going to be held accountable one day for that spiritual gift that you've received. And friend, can I just tell you, every one of us in this room, whether you feel like it or not, if you're a follower of Jesus, friend, you have been entrusted with a spiritual gift. And for many of you, multiple spiritual gifts. All of you have gifts. All of you have abilities, you have knowledge, you have things that God has entrusted to you, friend. Those are not for your own benefit. They are for the glory of God and the good of others. It is our job to steward them wisely. And that is part of your legacy. Did you steward what God entrusted to you wisely? And yet our culture does not emphasize that. I love something that pastor and author Andy Stanley said. He said, the value of a life is always measured by how much of it was what? Given away. At funerals, we never celebrate accumulation. We may envy accumulation, but we always celebrate generosity and selflessness. At the end of your life, that is what is celebrated. Life's got to be beyond you, not about you. What is contribution about? Contribution is about saying, I'm going to take everything God has entrusted to me, whether it is time, whether it is talent, whether it is money, whether it was influence, whatever it is. I'm going to take every gift that God has entrusted to me, and I am going to steward it wisely for His glory and for the good of others, so that at the end of my life, it's not about what I acquired and what I accumulated, but how much of my life I gave away to bless and serve others. Friend, that's legacy. That's legacy. So, you've got these three pieces that Paul emphasizes here. Character, who you are. Connections, who you impact. Contribution, what you do. But then there's the secret sauce. And the secret sauce is at the center of all of this. And the secret sauce is an eternal value. An eternal value. Recognizing I'm doing all of this. I'm living with character. I'm investing in people. I'm giving back through my gifts and my talents and my resources and my influence. I'm doing all of this with eternity in mind. With eternity in mind. And that's how Paul concludes his instruction to Timothy. He says this in verse 16. Keep a close watch on how you live and on your teaching. Stay true to what is right. Get this. Why? Why? Why, Timothy? Why do all of this? For the sake of your own salvation and the salvation of those who hear you. What is Paul doing? He's looking beyond the here and now. He's looking at eternity. It's not salvation from simply, oh, I'm having a bad day. God save me. It's the salvation of your soul, of your spirit, which lives forever. Your body's gonna die, but your spirit will live on. And Paul is saying, hey, Tim, listen, what we're doing here, you need to understand it's not just about here. It's about beyond here. It's about what's next, Timothy. So he's getting down to the why of all of this. It's choosing to live and give and relate in a way that matters to God and matters beyond the here and now. And you know what's interesting is as people get closer to the end of life, suddenly this becomes more important to them. In fact, years ago, a survey was done of 50 people who were over the age of 95. That's why it was only 50 people, right? Over the age of 95, okay? And they were asked this question, if you could live your life all over again, What would you do differently? Have you ever asked yourself that? If I could do life all over again, what would I do differently? The top three answers, they said I would reflect more, I would risk more, and I would do more things that live on after I die. That was one of their biggest regrets, that I didn't do enough that would live on after I'm out of this place, after I'm gone. And they carried the weight of that. Paul points to that very issue whenever he says, hey, this is how you should live your life, Paul. But Paul, listen, or Timothy, but listen, make sure you're doing it with eternity in mind, because that's what matters most. So let me ask you this morning, how's your character? Who are you investing in? What difference are you making with whatever God has entrusted you with? And are you doing this with eternity in mind? Over the next few weeks, we're going to unpack these in detail. Let me close with this. Many of you have heard Alfred Nobel's story before, but it so beautifully and powerfully captures what we're talking about. In 1888, Alfred Nobel read his own obituary in the newspaper. How did that happen? A French newspaper mistakenly thought he had died, when in fact it was his brother Ludwig who had died. And so curious, which we probably all would be, curious about what the obituary said, Alfred opened the newspaper and he read the obituary and discovered that it described him as, quote, the merchant of death. The merchant of death. The reason was because Alfred was the inventor of nitroglycerin, which was responsible for death and destruction in modern warfare. While he was granted 355 patents during his lifetime, the one he was most well known for was his invention of dynamite, and it turns out that was the one he would be remembered for. It was an invention that simplified the construction and was meant to simplify the construction of dams and railroads and canals and tunnels, but in the wrong hands could be used for death and destruction. Well, after reading that obituary, Alfred Nobel was arrested with everything inside of him, because he suddenly came face to face with the fact that how he was remembered is not how he would want to be remembered, and yet he was not yet dead. So he had to wrestle with the question, well, can this change? Does this have to be my story? And so he rewrote his will and used his $9 million fortune to establish a coveted award that today we know of as the Nobel Prize. The Nobel Prize has inspired discoveries and advancements in physics and chemistry and medicine and literature and peace. So this morning, as we close out this first message in our series, let me ask you a simple question. If you were given the fortune, let's call it the fortune, okay? If you were given the fortune of reading your own obituary in the newspaper, would you be happy with what it would say? What would it say about your character? What would it say about the people that you had impacted? What would it say about the contribution you had made with your life to advance the kingdom of God, to make the world better? Would it reflect a value for eternity? You see, if we want to leave a legacy worth remembering when we die, we have to write a legacy worth recording while we're alive. What happens when you're alive directly impacts how you're remembered when you die. And that happens when we focus on our character and our connections and our contribution, and we do it with a value for eternity. Let's pray.